Now with that, you also could make it a good point that the way that I made this with the flexible bellow, I gave it a little bit of tension just so it'll come down just enough, allowing for the angle up and over the transmission mount to have an angle of about on a higher pitch to come up and over the transmission mount. So when the intermediate pipe meets up to this, it's actually going to be pointing that intermediate pipe connection on an upward slope to make sure that it's pushing up and preventing the intermediate pipe from contacting the inside of the transmission mount or the top side of your heat shielding, because you'll feel that in your floorboard and you'll feel that in your transmission mount, and it will ruin the transmission mount bushing in the center of the transmission mount. So between the two problems you're going to run into, making sure that pipe's bend is directly in center over top of the transmission mount, that you have made a slight spin in the angle, if possible, when you're making this pipe. And it's very difficult because you have to reverse multiple 45-degree angles back and forth with different twists to make sure that you have the exact degree to come over it. And it almost becomes a corkscrew with slight angles, very, very slight angles. So each one of my pipes that I put in here actually have to have the slightest bit of a curve. So when you're actually looking at the side of the pipe, it has to come up, in, and then up, over, down, and back all the way to the back of the turbocharger flange. And the same thing on this one, where it has to come in, up, and over. And you have to be able to spin this pipe into place, as you also have the transmission lines, you have hoses, you have the transmission mount, you have the front differential. You got about 17 different things you have to make sure you can bypass to get this pipe back in there. And if you don't, then you have to put your flange higher up on the pipe. The issue becomes, if you do put a flange higher up on the pipe, and I did right off the back of the turbocharger, is you run into an issue. When you do that, it's almost impossible to get your head in there, to get your hands in there, or to get a light in there to be able to see where this pipe is actually matching up to this flange at. And if you don't have it dead center, you'll start the Porsche, you'll hear your turbocharger starting to leak on the inside, and it's leaking in the back of the engine bay. You have corrugated, extruded aluminum heat shielding that does work great to dissipate heat and prevent it from cooking the inside of the plastic body mounts. Unfortunately, it also works great as a convection oven, and as that flange is leaking, it's becoming a convection oven under the hood of your engine, allowing for all of your hoses to superheat, your crankcase ventilation hoses to start to crack, and Porsche has everything inside the engine with plastic. And I wish on this earth I could say that I could do better than that, and I can't. I've tried. And you have to match up to each individual aspect of what you're doing. I use Viton as much as I can in areas that I can to make sure that it's compatible with the fuel and oils before I install a hose, because silicone can't handle gasoline. Some of these hoses may handle oil and air, but also handle latent gas fumes. And if there's gas fumes traveling through certain hoses, it will cause the hose to become pliable and expand, resulting in a dangerous situation where gasoline fumes can occur underneath the hood of your car. So I always suggest do not try any of this at home, but I will make one recommendation. I purchased a combustible gas digital meter to make sure I can check for any ambient gas fumes in the air anytime I'm working with a fuel or around any type of object that contains fuel, as a preventative safety measure, and to make sure that my butt doesn't end up into the next rocket for SpaceX and put myself into orbit, because my fuel in this Porsche is likely to do something similar to that. So this is a tip to protect yourself. Make sure that whenever you're working on anything with these vehicles, you pay close attention to what material it is that you're removing and what you're putting back on the vehicle, why that particular part was made in such a way if you're going to remake it, as each individual part of this Porsche is also built in such a way to protect you and make sure that you don't die if you happen to bring this Porsche up to speed, as it's from the factory 167 miles per hour. On this Porsche, I've tuned this Porsche to stage 2, which puts me between 170 and 176 miles per hour to 186 miles per hour. it's not going to be able to achieve that as it's got high mileage on it, but it still runs like a champ. I did it because that will improve the airflow and the stoichiometric value for the air to fuel ratio in the engine, as I'm having a problem with my fuel trims as I allowed more oxygen to come out of the engine and improve more oxygen going into the engine. But I did not change the fuel trims originally, and it caused the engine to run very, very rich. So I've corrected that issue since then. I've also used a few things with tuning to test for diagnostic testing, as the diagnostic codes were not conclusive to what I was looking for. So as a method to try to improve on diagnostics, I was integrating a method of utilizing tuning and shutting off certain modules in order to find out and verify if it's the module itself, the signal coming from the cable, or another integral part of the system, which I have oscilloscopes and everything else to test for this. So I do have a very professional degree of knowledge in computer science and electronics, and through that knowledge I'm able to do proper diagnosis and proper assessment of what I'm working with, as I do work with quite dangerous chemicals on a regular basis with epoxy resins and other polymers, and I'm used to being aware of what the data sheet tells you, and then being able to match products that will be compatible with whatever the product is you're working with, and protect yourself with personal protection equipment. Always safety glasses. If you're working with any type of grinder, use any type of ear coverings that you have, but make sure that they're rated and they are approved to make sure they're past OSHA standards. Just a tip. A few tips.